So, Blade Runner 2049 was mind-blowing in the most unexpected way. Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. My channel is Empathic Humanology, and this is my first video. Yay! I wasn't intending to make this my first video, but for a couple of weeks now, I haven't been able to stop thinking about one thing, and that one thing being Blade Runner 2049. I've been thinking about it so much, I was like, I have to make a video about this. Blade Runner 2049 was so many things all in one movie, and it had everything you could want in a film. For me, that would be the cinematography and what I call the thinking elements, which is the philosophy that comes from watching a film like Blade Runner 2049, where you're asking yourself bigger questions about life, about humanity, your place in society, how you're treating others, how you see society treat others, what is acceptable, and questions like that. And it's such a rarity to get films like that that actually do make you ask those questions. And when they come along, I like to see them as many times as I can to soak in as much as I can from that film. Were there some parts that were a letdown? Yes. But I believe that to be because of the exceptionally high standard that the first film sets in how do you go about making something better than a masterpiece, considering that Blade Runner is one of the greatest, if not the greatest sci-fi movie of all time. It feels like the equivalent of when a musician has to go back into the studio to make that difficult second album after they've done that first album, and that first album is considered a best album of all time. A few examples of that would be The Education of Lauryn Hill and Adele's second album, well, third album after she made the second album, 21, because everyone was like, how is she going to make that album better? And I include myself in that as well, but she did it. And that's the main struggle that this film was always facing. So for them to have made something that a lot of people actually not only enjoyed, but to go from it didn't need to be made, it wasn't necessary, to we want more, it's truly groundbreaking in itself, considering how hard it is to not only make a sequel that's enjoyable, but something that is maybe better than the original because it adds something more to what is already a complex world. Does this movie do that? Mostly yes and no, but the no doesn't take away from this film being up there with the likes of Terminator 2, The Dark Knight, and The Godfather Part 2, and I purposely picked those examples because not only do they add more to the story, but add like an additional depth to the characters, and they become more complex rather than one-dimensional. Even though the characters in the first films of the ones I just mentioned were already quite complex, but I'm going to exclude one of those because I think in the first Terminator film, I didn't find Sarah Connor to be that complex of a character, and I don't know if it's because I've not seen it as many times as others, and others may have a different take on that, but I found that watching her in Terminator 2, she did become a bit more multi-dimensional and was a very complicated character. But I think with the other ones, it's more a case of they establish that these characters are quite complicated and quite complex, and they did build upon that. So just to be forewarned, this should have come earlier, but there will be spoilers, major spoilers, so I would recommend seeing this film before watching this, and if you can, watch it on the biggest screen you can find. If you live in London, that's quite easy because the biggest screen we have here is the BFI IMAX, and I don't know if that's the biggest screen in Europe or the world, it's one of those. Feel free to comment and let me know, but if you can, go and see it there because that's the sort of screen that does this film the justice that it actually needs to be done, basically. That's the best way for me to describe it. But that's the kind of screen where you need to see like a movie like this to take in all the visual elements of this film. So Blade Runner 2049. So far I've seen it twice, and my first thoughts were it was visually awe-inspiring and I gave it 11 out of 10. But with regards to the story, I thought it was good but not great, so I gave it an 8 out of 10. So the only thing about Blade Runner 2049 and the original Blade Runner is that they both suffer from the same problems. And I'm going to touch on two of these because these are the most obvious ones. But first one being that they both underperformed at the box office. So I'm hoping that when Blade Runner 2049 gets released in the iTunes store, because I don't think people buy DVDs anymore. But anyway, I'm hoping when it gets released there, through word of mouth, it'll develop a cult following. And then from this cult following, it'll be seen as a classic. And then once that happens, it'll then go down as being seen as one of the greatest films of all time, because it truly does deserve that recognition. But I might be biased because I just think it's brilliant. But anyway, the other problem that I saw was Hollywood interference. In that, in the theatrical cut of the first one, the Hollywood interference there was that we get a dumbed-down version of the film, and I say that because so much is explained to the audience in that you introduce your character, get their backstory, and you're told this is why they do what they do, this is why they think what they think. You're not given that space to really think about their actions and why in the bigger picture of things. You're just told this is what it is. Whereas with Blade Runner 2049, you're allowed to do that. You're allowed that space to think about the characters, because each character, with their backstories, you're told so little. You're given like the bare minimum that you need in order for you to actually watch the film as it is. I'd say even with Deckard, although he probably has the biggest backstory considering the original Blade Runner, from the time when that film ends up till now, you're still told very little besides Rachel giving birth, that he left her. You're still told very little about how he got from where he was to where he is now. And it's the same with the other characters in that you're just given the bare bones of their backstory, but nothing solid and nothing concrete. So you're allowed to think about it a bit more. So going back to the Hollywood interference and where it comes into play in Blade Runner 2049, it just felt it was playing out a storyline that's been done time and time and time again. What you're seeing is essentially the same Hollywood story that you've seen in other films. I noticed this more so with the last action sequence in the fight between Kay and Love. I found that to be just so disappointing, so anticlimactic, because it was such a cliche. Really spoiled the end for me, because I know some people were coming out of the cinema and they were crying because of seeing Kay dying and Deckard meeting his daughter, and I didn't feel anything because I was thinking about the last fight, and it done so well up to that point because it set like this unique tone. And then you see that and it's, oh, it just felt like such a letdown. And adding to that, I would also say with some of the lines that we used, they also felt like you'd heard them before in other films. With the first Blade Runner, it was the opposite, because the lines that they used were so unique and so original and so different. Whereas with this film, and this is going to sound a bit contradictory now, but now they were using some lines that were, yeah, you've heard them before in other films. It also felt like they was trying too hard to find other lines that they would be like, yeah, we're going to get these people to quote these lines and these are going to be the most quotable lines from the film and the most quotable lines of all time. On my first viewing of Blade Runner 2049, for me, it started off badly from the beginning, and it had nothing to do with the film or the story or anything like that, but I would say mostly with the music score. And I know this is not going to be a popular opinion, because I know a lot of people loved the music and they thought it was right. Some people didn't, and I'm going to be a part of the ones that didn't. But I think they got the wrong composer, because the score did feel off at points in the film. And the part for me where it felt the most off was the beginning scene with the prologue. When the prologue starts and you see that narrative first emerge, you hear a piano being used. And the way it's being played, it just sounds so opposite to what this film really is. Like, there's a similar film out there. What they've done is they've taken music from that film, placed it in this, and it just felt so off. It felt like you was watching a different movie. But I sat there and I was watching it. I was thinking, okay, looking forward to this. And the music starts and I was like, have I come to see the right film? It just felt so off from the mood of the Blade Runner universe. Even though they got that wrong, I would say there were other parts that they got right, music-wise, and what they got right did complement the bleakness. It was just that first part just didn't do it for me. It starts off with a prologue of explaining what's been happening since the first one, and when the prologue begins, 6 piano chords are played. Now, I'm not sure if it's because I know from that moment I see the narrative, I'm immediately comparing it to the first Blade Runner film. But to me, the use of the piano just felt so out of place, because the chords that we used just sound so similar to chords that we used in other films. A few examples of this would be the beginning of Inception, when you see that first shot of Cobb and he's on the beach, and how that starts music-wise. But also I'd say Rush, Batman v Superman, and Arrival. I know every film composer has their own unique sound, so that when you go see a film, you know it's composed by. An example of this would be Danny Elfman. It just felt like it needed something more. Anyway, on second viewing, I saw that each time a chord was played, a new sentence in the narrative emerged. Felt like the piano was highlighting the mood of each sentence. The thing with this though, is when you listen to the music, or I'd say the sounds in the first Blade Runner movie, music is used sparingly for the first 2 minutes and 25 seconds, and yes, I did time it, and it just sounds like nothing we've ever heard. And so far, nothing we've ever heard since Blade Runner. It's just so different and so unique, and just really, really does set up that film. I was listening to other songs from other movies to see if they would fit with this film, well, with the prologue at least. And for me, the closest song that I could find was the first 12 seconds of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, I'm Electro. And even though you could argue, yeah, it fits, it's still a derivative version of the quote-unquote music from the prologue of the first Blade Runner film. But I just felt it was more suited than the current music that's being used in the prologue of Blade Runner 2049. and the prologue of Blade Runner 2049 just sounds similar to other films. But is it a fair criticism? No. I guess it could be used as an indicator of how the film will go. Well, more so the last part of Blade Runner 2049, because it could be used to show that the time is now different and it's different to the time of the past, showing that there is hope here, or hope is coming. Possibly that things are different in a better way. And the emphasis is on it being changed from the first Blade Runner film, in that there's a different tone, and the fact that we're going to focus on a character that is so unlike the character of Deckard. The piano is to emphasise change and represent the passing of time, as if to say so much has gone on between then and now. This is where we are now. It represents a story as we're going to see it, hence the different tone and uses of the chord. It did redeem itself after the prologue with the next scene because of the visuals. After the prologue, we then have a shot of an eye, which is a nice throwback to the original, and that's what got me back into enjoying this, because this is what I wanted in this one. But for them to not just show a close-up of an eye because they could, or just so that they could link this one to the first one, but in a way where it's actually necessary to the story. It's like the equivalent of when you go to the theatre and the curtains are pulled back. It felt like an introduction to Kay. Even though I don't think that's his eye, it felt like if the camera was to pull away, we'd be in a room which would essentially be a production line of other replicants. Yet the focus on this eye seems to say, "Hi, my name is Kay and this is my story." Even in the beginning, when we first get that close-up of an eye, it's as if to say not only is it the most important body part, which is emphasised with the reference number being placed on it to separate and make each replicant an individual, but I imagine for a replicant, the eye is the place where visual information is actually processed. As a human, our eyes send visual signals to the brain, and it's the brain that interprets what we see. Yet with a replicant, in the first Blade Runner, the eyes are made by a replicant eye manufacturer, which is why I think the visual information would be processed there, as I imagine there being a very miniature CPU placed in the eye. I also think that with the close-up shots, both in this one and the Blade Runner, the eye is meant to say, this is where it all starts. So after that, we see a shot of a car flying over what looks like a farm. On second viewing, I realised it was a protein farm. When flying over the farm, we see what looks like solar panels surrounding farming technology in the middle, and it's shaped like an eye. From above, it looks like an eye, with the technology being placed in the centre, which I see as a visual representation, with Anna being like the technology, with her being the memory maker, and the solar panels representing where she's placed. In the original, there's a lot of close-up with eyes. I feel that this is a nod to the first Blade Runner, but here it's done differently. Later on, when Kay goes to the child labour camp, the dome sculptures that are there are again shaped like eyes. Also, when Kay meets Dr. Anna Stelline, I think I've messed up her name there. But anyway, the room she is in is shaped like an eye. Anna is in what I would see as being the vitreous humour part of the eye, as the vitreous humour part protects the eye. I say that because in this case, Anna being unable to leave the room because of a weakened immune system, in essence, the room keeps her alive because it's sterile and has no viruses and bacteria. Now, when I was looking into more research about this, I found this website, and what this says is, the vitreous humour comprises a large portion of the eyeball. It's a clear gel-like substance that occupies the space behind the lens and in front of the retina at the back of the eye. Because the eye must process visual data, this liquid must be clear enough for light to easily pass through it. Most of this humour consists of water, as well as a lower amount of collagen, salt and sugar. This humour is stagnant, immobile fluid that is not served by any blood vessels and is not actively regenerated or replenished. This is in contrast to the aqueous humour which fills the anterior chamber in front of the lens. If a substance enters the vitreous humour, it will remain suspended in the gel until it can be surgically removed. These substances, which can include blood or clumps of cell, are collectively referred to as floaters. Left alone, floaters can affect a person's field of vision. As people age, vitreous thins. This can result in a condition called posterior vitreous detachment, where the vitreous separates from the retina. Posterior vitreous detachment occurs in most people by age 70. It can cause floaters, but generally resolve on its own over time. Problems with the vitreous humour may ultimately lead to detachment of the retina from the back of the wall of the eye, which may require surgery. Retinal detachment can result in permanent loss of vision. Yeah, so that's why I connected her with being in that part of the eye. I also feel that with that room, it feels like the equivalent of developing a photo in a dark room. Anna uses the room to develop memories in the same way that a photographer would use a dark room to develop photos. For instance, when she is talking to Kay as she is working, she creates a memory of children around a birthday cake, and the room is dark when she is doing this. What better metaphor than to design a structure that looks like an eye to emphasise exactly what it is that she's doing. Going back to the eye itself, and according to Wikipedia, vitreous fluid is not present at birth but is found after age 4 or 5 and increases in size thereafter. It changes over time. A first being dense and then in adulthood it's better defined but has many curves and turns. I feel like this represents that there is essentially a blank slate as the eye just takes in the information, but as we come across more data as we get older, it needs more resources to process it. I think that what we've discussed so far about the eye and the vitreous humour, it also symbolises Kay's journey in that at first he's set to be subservient and then as he gets more information he changes and becomes more multifaceted. So we're introduced to Officer K, who was there to take down Sapper Morton. Now when I first saw this, I didn't watch any of the short films, but I did afterwards, so I went in clueless as to why he was there. However, it's established that Sapper Morton was protecting humans that he'd grown an attachment to, and in order to do so, he had to kill some other humans. This opens up the first interesting thought about loyalty. When watching Blade Runner 2036 Nexus Dawn, Neander Wallace's goal is to create a line of replicants that will obey and not rebel in order to colonise other places with humanity. Mr. Wallace was able to grow because he solved the hunger problem, which is touched upon in Blade Runner 2036 Nexus Dawn and the prologue. And with that, he was able to create a new line of replicants, along with demonstrating that there will be no further problems with these replicants, as they will comply and be subservient to humans. The only problem is a lack in numbers. Both films, more so this one, seem to be like an adult sci-fi version of Pinocchio, in that Pinocchio longs to be a real boy, but the Blue Fairy informs him that in order to do so, he must be brave, truthful and unselfish, which echoes the sentiment in this film of making a sacrifice greater than oneself, which is seen as being the closest that the replicants be to being human. The way the replicants want to be human in Blade Runner is to either have more life, or in the Blackout short film, to not have a reference number on their eyeballs so that they can live life as humans do, which is freely. In Blade Runner 2049, we are shown that Fraser is missing an eye, the eye which would have a reference number on it, Fraser being a replicant. After the fight, Sapper asks Kay how it feels to retire his own kind. Kay responds with, "I don't retire my own kind because we don't run." Kay at that moment feels disdain for Sapper Morton because he sees that version of replicant as being disrespectful and not loyal. The most consistent programmed belief that all replicants share is loyalty, in one way or another. Love's loyalty is to Mr. Wallace. Deckard, if we was to go down the route of believing he's a replicant, his loyalty is to Rachel. However, when looking at their loyalty, it actually turns into protection. All replicants have a purpose where they are protecting something. I think what would have been good to explore a little bit more is the backstory between Deckard and Rachel. Rachel's love for Deckard seems to come from a place of ironically not being real, in that their first romantic interaction is uncomfortable and looks like it's one of being forced. When looking at their first interaction, Deckard tells her to kiss him, and at the end, as they're just about to leave, he asks whether she loves him. She says she does, and whether she trusts him. She says she does. It feels like she's being fed commands rather than it being from the same way that humans would make their decision, which would be based more on instinct, and that instinct being built on past behaviours. It would have been interesting to see if the love between Rachel and Deckard evolved more naturally for Rachel, or whether love evolved more naturally for her when she gave birth to Anna, the love child, ironically, of Deckard and Rachel. Kay's loyalty is to people and things that treat him with contempt and like he is lesser than they are, yet he goes along with this subservient role. Sapper's disdain of this motion of thought is because he sees it as Kay being programmed in a way in which his loyalty would be no different to the loyalty of citizens in oppressive countries where you're taught what to think and feel, etc., whereas Sapper knows that they deserve much more than that. Kay's compliance is demonstrated when Kay returns back to the LAPD for his baseline test, a test to see if he's still submissive. From additional research, meaning Reddit, people have commented that the answers that Kay gives when he's taking his baseline test are words from Pale Fire, which is referenced later on when Joy asks him to read from it. Clearly this book is a favourite book of Kay's, but the question is it really his choice or someone else's choice? Officer K confronts Sapper Morton, and I was unclear of what he was saying after the fight, but I did research it, and it turns out what he says is that they are treated like shit and that Kay hasn't witnessed a miracle. When Kay first hears this, he pauses as if he's taking it in. When Rachel gave birth, it was a miracle because it was something that's never happened and should be impossible. I feel that the miracle line is something that's been said before, and it's what I call a triggering quote for replicants who are fighting for their freedom and they've adopted it. But the actual word miracle, it actually feels like that's meant to be the actual trigger. A trigger implanted in the same replicant model line as Kay. A trigger so that if any replicant was to find Sapper Morton, they would be triggered into believing that they are the child, or as a test of loyalty. So that's where it all starts. Anyway, Sapper Morton's disdain of Kay's compliance is because Sapper has seen something that no one has ever seen, a miracle, and that being the birth of Anna, Rachel and Deckard's daughter. Sapper Morton's loyalty or protection is about something that matters. Kay's loyalty in Sapper Morton's eyes is to something smaller and something that doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, and that being humanity and the things that keep the replicants repressed. It feels like the birth of Anna is similar to the story of Jesus. In this case though, Mr. Wallace would be Harold. Harold is seen as a tyrannical leader who wanted Jesus to be killed because Jesus threatened his position. The position here is the replicants uprising and overthrowing the status quo so that they can become their own people. So we even saw the story of Moses, similar to those stories in that Jesus' existence was to show that there was a better way. In the short film 2048 Nowhere to Run, Sapper hands the girl he ends up protecting a book called The Power and the Glory. The Power and the Glory is a story about a renegade Roman Catholic whiskey priest living in the Mexican state of Tabasco in the 1930s, a time when the Mexican government was attempting to suppress the Catholic Church, and this suppression led to the Cristero War. The main protagonist is a contradiction of failure, but wanting something more for themselves. Now, I haven't read this story, so I'm still unsure as to whether the story is actually a parallel of the story of Blade Runner 2049, or whether the protagonist in that story shares the same backstory as Sapper Morton. But both the protagonists in that book and Sapper Morton seem to be similar. In the book, the protagonist is protecting an evil-looking and awkward little girl. This follows in Blade Runner 2048 in that Sapper Morton is protecting a human girl from other humans, a cognitive dissonance in that he is protecting someone which is important to him, yet other humans back up his views about humans, which I imagine aren't great beliefs considering he's part of a slave race who are repressed and looked down upon by other humans. Sapper Morton puts Kay on the path to greatness in that if Kay never knew about Sapper, he never would have got the bonus, which meant he wouldn't have upgraded Joy, which means his love for her would never have grown to the place where it launched him on this path, as I think Joy was another catalyst to this, by how much she loved him and told him he was special. Kay ends up retiring Sapper Morton, but you have to wonder if the reason he goes to further attack Kay is to protect his own life, in that it seems like in Blade Runner, the first one, an older replicant only attacks when they feel their life is being threatened, or whether he believed that in killing Kay, if that were what he was planning on doing, it would stop Kay from being led to Anna. In Sapper's mind, Kay is an enemy because of his loyalty to the state, who has the potential of destroying the replicants' resistance by leading Anna to the people who will destroy her, by experimenting on her until there's nothing left of her, ending the replicants' best weapon when it comes to fighting for their freedom. On Kay's return to the station, he's taunted by his colleagues, and as he walks through the corridor, he puts his head down whenever passing a colleague or when they say something, showing that he is subservient to them. Kay's passiveness is demonstrated in his interaction with Lieutenant Joshai, in that he waits for her to tell him what to do, and when he sees something by the tree, he says he's going to check it out before he leaves. She stays online, meaning that he's never allowed to explore in the same way that if a human cop was to spot something extra, they would not have to check in until they reach the station and would be allowed to explore further, only bringing in backup resources later. Another clue of Kay's subservient nature is in his name. He's given a letter and numbers, whereas free or rebelling replicants are given a first name and a second name, becoming as close to human as possible. The next part that grabbed my attention was the love story between Kay and Joy. I absolutely loved this. It was my favourite part of the movie. This was my favourite element because it plays out a love story as if they're two humans, in that their interactions are no different than any human couple. When we look at human love interactions, the most dominant one is a heterosexual cis couple. In Blade Runner, going beyond the scope of human relationship, it seems you have replicant and replicant, AI and AI, possibly, but AI seems to be for use by replicants and humans, human and replicant, and of course replicant and AI. Now, if we were to compare Kate and Joy's relationship to a human relationship, the closest couple match would be that of a trans person and a cis person. For instance, how Mariette treats Joy is as a lesser woman than she is because Joy is an AI and Mariette is a replicant, or as Mariette sees it, she sees it as she exists and Joy is not really there. However, in this film, the relationship of a trans and cis person is shown through the eyes of a heterosexual couple who are replicant and AI. Joy's main hang-up is that she doesn't feel that she's real enough for Kay and longs to be real for him. However, Kay sees her as being real. He says he doesn't need her to be real or need anyone's approval because he sees her as that, and that's enough for him to love her. The equivalent of how a trans person would be loved by their partner, where their partner would see them as the gender that they are, rather than the gender that society tells them that they are. Now, some of you may be saying you've lost me or why are we discussing this. I discuss it from the point of view in that Blade Runner 2049, Kay and Joy's relationship is seen as being quote-unquote unconventional. The only way to understand an unconventional relationship is to see it through the lens and setting of a conventional relationship, seeing the only difference is surface level and that the same problems remain. In a cis couple, the identity issues would be around the insecurities that a person may have around their looks, weight, personality, etc. Insecurities that a majority of people would have and be able to see. Whereas in a quote-unquote unconventional relationship, the identity issues are not physically tangible but do feel as real and are only experienced by a minority rather than a majority. In this case, the main identity issue that Kay has is that he longs to be treated as human, which becomes more pronounced as the film goes on. Joy has the same longing, but her issue is that she wants to be seen as real as Kay is, so their connection is they share the identity, being seen as wanting to be more real. People refer to Joy as Kay's girlfriend, but I see it more like a marriage, or how a marriage should actually be between two people, in that you're looking at a relationship where two people see each other as being perfect and are willing to do anything to make each other happy, including sacrificing themselves for something that is greater than the relationship in a positive way. Now, I feel like this ties into the criticism, because I know there's been a lot of criticism about how this movie is degrading towards women. Quite the opposite, in that in the Blade Runner society, the roles of women tend to lead to great change. The female replicants tend to lead to something greater than the relationship, in that it pushes both people to become better people by evoking real change within the Blade Runner society. One thing you have to wonder though is, with the program upgrade, is it because it's Kay fulfilling Joy's wish of being real, which is more likely, or to make her more real for Kay's desire? Yet with a lot of Kay's actions, he comes across as a selfless replicant, and it feels like this is what he spends a lot of time wrestling with. This is normally seen in his interactions with Lieutenant Joshua, the first being when Joy is experiencing rain for the first time and Kay is kissing Joy. This gets interrupted as Joy pauses to allow a voicemail message to come through from Lieutenant Joshua, asking Kay to come back to the station. Kay feels conflicted as he wants to spend time with Joy, experiencing this moment with her. Joy being able to experience things is what I would call a small miracle for her. The rain to her is what going to Disneyland for the first time is to a kid that loves Disney, which would be absolutely amazing if they didn't. And if I was a parent and my kid hated Disney, I would be devastated, but that's a whole nother story. Anyway, moving on. Another thing to add is that Joy asks Kay to read to him. She hands him Pale Fire, and he says that she hates that. I haven't read this book or know much about it, but when doing my Wikipedia research, I was drawn to this line which says, though a minority of commentators believe or at least accept the possibility that Sembia is as real as New Y, most assume that Sembia, or at least the operatic, quaint and homosexually gratified palace enjoyed by Charles Kimbolt before he's overthrown is imaginary in the context of the story. I feel that this describes Joy and Kay's relationship, as she doesn't like Pale Fire because the parts of the book that she already knows highlight her assistance as not being real, like a constant reminder, whereas Kay would represent the minority that sees Sembia, meaning Joy, as being real. With Joy, it's the one time in his life he doesn't feel like a replicant, he feels human. But I guess you could also say that the reason he may keep her around is because in some ways he feels superior to her, and that superiority being that in that instant he becomes seen as being more real than she is, so he doesn't experience the kind of backlash that she would experience in that moment of time with the people that he interacts with, and Marriott being a key example of that. The way Joy was filmed was so clever in that they gave us two visions, how Kay sees her and how others see her, in that at times she looked human and at other times we could see through her, which adds to the questioning as to whether her feelings were real for Kay if we compare them to her true form, which is her not really being there and that's prompted. I think with Joy, and that to me, it wasn't a case of she got more real as time went on, it was she was real from the moment she was upgraded, and I found it really hard to see her as an AI, and I didn't clock it until the second watch when they were in the rain and Kay places his hands in a way that a child would if they were playing with their imaginary friend. If you were to go along with the idea that she was programmed that way and that her feelings for Kay were just the way she's programmed, then you could say that she's similar to Samantha, the AI girlfriend in the film Her, in that she learned as she went along. And the same thing could be occurring with Joy. However, duty calls, and instead of Kay selfishly enjoying this moment with Joy, he postpones it and goes to the station. A moment that is the equivalent of sharing a special first experience with someone you love, and a moment which can really only be experienced once. But he decides to put others first, which reinforces his desire to be human, so he can have more freedom over his life, as to not go would be Kay demonstrating that he's non-compliant. So Kay goes back to the station where they're exploring the bones that were uncovered from Kay's discovery. For such an unearthing has extremely serious ramifications, you would think the remains of Rachel would be placed somewhere where they couldn't be discovered, so you could look at this as being a convenient plot point. However, like the impossible miracle of a replicant giving birth, a single flower blossoms on what looks like barren land, again symbolising the story, and also a miracle that's taken place. The flowers are yellow chrysanthemum, which are sometimes called mums, and symbolise optimism and joy. Now there's two ways to look at this. Either this happened naturally to symbolise the miracle that Rachel's achieved, or it was purposely put there as a tiny memorial to the memory of Rachel and a new start she has created for other replicants. The guy who is examining Rachel's remains talks down about replicants, referring to them by the common derogatory name of skin jobs. Even when being called that, Kay says nothing, and the way it is said by humans is in a way which dehumanises the human, in that they think that just because a replicant is not human, as they are missing a soul, in humanity's eyes, they have no feelings. Yet the discovery that Rachel was pregnant was made by Kay. I think that symbolises a discovery that humans wouldn't make. It seems like the fact that Kay had to look for it shows that it was something that only a replicant could see. The awakening of the trigger that Supplemental started becomes more active when Lieutenant Joshua basically gives Kay an ultimatum, that being either you kill this replicant human hybrid or this will destroy society as we know it. However, the destroying of society in Blade Runner is basically an uprising where the replicant would not only outnumber humanity, but where the roles would reverse, which would be likely considering how replicants are treated by humanity. The way society works in the Blade Runner universe is similar to how it works in our universe, in that Lieutenant Joshua tells Kay, the world is built in a wall that separates kind. Tell either side there's no wall, you've brought a war. A wall that needs to be there in order for there to be a divide in society where one group is better than the other. This ensures survival. However, if the wall disappears, then one group is subject to extinction and it becomes the survival of the fittest. The divide comes about when finding something, anything, which differentiates one person from the other. In this case, it's bioengineered humans who are stronger, and their one flaw, instead of being born, they are grown, as they say in the Matrix, but in this case, the actual flaw is that this leads humans to believe that replicants are born without a soul, which makes them more disposable. There's no attachment, as replicants are no different to the food that is grown in that universe. A key program of K is that he's a replicant that doesn't run, meaning that he doesn't disobey orders. He's programmed to be loyal to the continual existence of humanity and to protect them. Yet the first glimpse of disobedience of this is when he says that he's never had to retire something that was born, again emphasising that the difference between a human and a replicant is a soul. Lieutenant Joshua tells him that he's done well without having a soul so far. I think this hurts Kay because this is someone who he respects and who doesn't make derogatory remarks such as calling him a skin job. But in that moment, he is again shown that he's less than human because he was grown and feels he's missing a soul and that his place will always be beneath humans. The conflict is that he's programmed to remain loyal to humanity, yet he now has to retire someone who, because they were born, he sees as being human. When we are first introduced to Love, we see a replicant who is as helpful as she can be, but is very loyal to Mr. Wallace. I feel that she's called Love because she can see the beauty in the cruelties of the world, in particular death. Love is a conflicted character. When walking to Mr. Wallace, the light in front of her is bright, but behind her it's dark to suggest that she's an angel of darkness and symbolising the darkness in her nature. When Mr. Wallace kills a new replicant because she's not good enough, we can see that Love is able to cry a single tear. This seems to be the common theme in that when they are touched by something, they cry a single tear. I can't remember if it's from the same eye, but to me that says that the replicant is crying because they, like a human, find it the easiest way to express themselves when they see something that they see as being so beautiful they can't put it into words. Death to them is beautiful because to them it's the closest they get to having a human experience. When Love enters the kingdom of heaven, as Mr. Wallace calls it, he calls her an angel, but then again he calls all his replicants angels, and he calls them angels because they obey him, they obey his word, and are willing to sacrifice their own lives for the sake of his life. But then again, that's the only sacrifice that he does allow them to make. In the Matrix Reloaded film, the architect tells Neo that the only way the Matrix is accepted 99% of the time with test subjects is when they're given a choice, even if they were only aware of it at near unconscious level. The choice in Nexus Dawn is far more manipulative in that the only choice a replicant can make is between choosing their life or Mr. Wallace's life, but they've been programmed in such a way that they can only choose Mr. Wallace's life over their own. I see Love's role as being similar to that of the Metatron, but the female version. Love is the replicant that is closest to Mr. Wallace, and I say Metatron because Mr. Wallace holds her as his favourite replicant because she obeys his every word. In mythology, the Metatron is presented as having immense power and wisdom. Metatron is second only to God himself, which would echo the end before she dies when she says, "I'm the last one." She also carries out Mr. Wallace's purpose with regards to finding the child. However, because she does kill, you could also say that instead of the Metatron, maybe she is actually the angel Raguel, whose name means friend of God, whose function is to take vengeance on the world by killing the people who have transgressed God's laws, basically acting as a cop for God. I must say that when they kept saying about finding a child, I found it bizarre because Anna, the child, is actually an adult, and it did make me think of the film The Golden Child. But anyway, now when I first watched this, I saw the tear that Love cries as Love being conflicted and that she doesn't agree with Mr. Wallace, who shows no attachment to replicants and a distant attachment to humans. Now with Mr. Wallace being blind, I saw his blindness as echoing his lack of attachment to anything. But I also saw it as it could mean that Mr. Wallace is indeed a replicant, which would make sense because if he was indeed human, the way he has been working with to make the replicants perfect, I think he would experiment personally with reproduction, using himself, if you know what I mean. Although he does say the line that he's tried to make replicants so that they can get pregnant. Also with Mr. Wallace being blind, this again would add to the thought that he is a replicant in that he cut out his replicant eyes because they are barcoded and he wanted to escape from the system. Also hinting at a darker motive if he is able to create the replicants he needs to colonise and indulge in his God complex further, in essence creating a slavery of humans and replicants so that he indeed becomes the one true God. As shown in Blade Runner 2036 Nexus Dawn, Mr. Wallace manipulates humanity for his own gain of being the one true God as much as he manipulates his replicants. The manipulation of humanity is done by saying humanity has only survived this long by crushing Earth to suit their needs, guilt-tripping them into believing that the fault of their famine crisis is their own. Mr. Wallace also tells them that the stars are our only home and they are hiding behind the lives he needs to recreate, but the board won't allow him to do this. Mr. Wallace is told that off-world colonies are thriving, but he tells them that they are insufficient to the needs of humanity's survival. Kay goes back to the farm again and it adds to the first trigger as he finds another clue, a small knitted baby sock and a picture of Frasier holding Anna as a baby. He also finds a birthday carved onto a tree which makes Kay think about a past memory which he later tells Lieutenant Joshua about, a memory of a wooden horse with the same date on its foot which matches the date that he found at the farm. Later, Kay finds this horse, which seems to be a nod to Pinocchio, and we'll say the Disney version as that's the one we're most familiar with. And I say Pinocchio because it's a wooden boy who becomes a real boy. When Kay finds the horse and he goes back to his apartment, Joy tells him that he needs a new name, so she calls him Joe. Towards the end when Deckard is looking for him, it sounds like he shouts Joel. Now in the Bible, Joel was seen as a prophet, which would be in line with Joy saying he is special, to go along with the fact that Joy was programmed to tell Kay what he wanted to hear, so maybe that's how he felt about himself and he heard that instead. Or I just get it that he just feels different to everyone else because of how he's treated. And from how he's treated, I just got a sense he looks at life as if to say, there's more to life than this. Now, according to this website, when it comes to Joel, it says, it is known that during his life, a terrible catastrophe befell the land. A swarm of locusts, surpassed only by the plague of locusts, descended upon the fields and vineyards and devoured everything green. We know that in the Blade Runner universe, there was a famine issue that Mr. Wallace solved. It does go on to say, God will repay them for suffering manyfold, and ye shall eat and be satisfied, and praise the name of God your Lord, who has dealt wondrously with you. However, I was most drawn to this part when it says, after Israel's triumph, Joel foresees a day when all mankind, even men and women of the lowest station in life, shall have the knowledge and vision of God. And it shall come to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams, and your young men shall see visions. And also upon the servants and upon handmaidens in those days will I pour out my spirit. Now, this doesn't feel like this ties in with Mr. Wallace's agenda, but more the replicant's resistance, as I call it. Anyway, going back to the memory, we learn that the memory was implanted by Anna, and the memory implanted into Kay is actually a real memory, which we learn later is illegal, but we never learn why implanting real memories are illegal in the film, or that might have just been something I missed, but I don't recall it ever being discussed as to why. In the first Blade Runner film, in order to prove that she's real, Rachel relays memories to Deckard, but Deckard tells her that they're implants from Tyrell's niece. Yet in this time, real memories are illegal. And I couldn't help but think, but was this because of the bloody mutiny that occurred with Nexus 6? Also, was the trigger that caused that mutiny triggered by the memories that were implanted in the replicants? Memories that the Nexus 6 replicants interpreted in such a way that they may have been responsible for the start of the mutiny. In Nexus Dawn 2036, the board that decide whether to allow replicants or not explain that there's currently a prohibition of replicants in place and they don't wish to repeal this. Basically, replicants are outlawed. And say they're outlawed because the safeguards that Dr. Tyrell put in place were negligent, and Nexus replicants have a reputation of being unreliable as they disobey and run. They also tell Mr. Wallace that there's been blood on the streets and too many lives have been lost, suggesting that the cost of what Mr. Wallace is asking is too much due to how many replicants rebel, which is quite a few to put it mildly. This pushes Mr. Wallace to get them to say yes because he needs them not only as a consumer, but to have a race of people who worship him to add to his God complex. And they do this by relying on him, as Mr. Wallace has provided them effectively with the one thing that they need and couldn't get anywhere else, which is food. And he uses this against them when he says, you remember hunger, so you indulge the recluse whose patterns keep that hunger at bay. He says that he believes in life and that humanity is dying. This could show that he is indeed a replicant because he has done something that no one else has managed to do, and also it puts him above everyone else as he's managed to figure out something that would put him on the same level as a god. That being, humans need food to survive. That's one of the things we all have in common. If food was taken away and there was no other resources around, and someone came by who could solve that problem by introducing more resources, which are not God-made, but made by this person, in this case Mr. Wallace, they would indeed become the new god or founding father. A similar example we have is social media. The founding father would be Tom Anderson, who started MySpace, the first most well-known social networking website, and the next one would be Mark Zuckerberg, who created Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg did the equivalent of what Mr. Wallace did in this example, he took what the founding fathers of social media did and expanded on the social media universe to make it into what we know it as today, a place which connects us to anywhere in the world in an instant with videos, posts, people, etc. Mr. Wallace expanded the Blade Runner universe by creating enough food resources for humanity to survive. So doing what Zuckerberg did, but doing it differently in that he expanded food resources to ensure that there was enough for everybody. Yet he states about humanity dying, and that brings them to their present concern. So it would seem that the food resources that he's created aren't enough, and that's the reasoning for colonizing other planets to gain their resources. So the resources they have so far are not enough, and in order to gain more resources, they need more people, ensuring the survival of humanity so that Mr. Wallace can continue to be seen as the god that he believes he is in their eyes. Anyway, go back to memories. In real life, there's a thing called cellular memory, which is a scientific hypothesis where memories are stored in cells. So the stronger the emotion that someone feels about an experience they have, the more of it gets stored throughout their body. If you want to read actual stories about where this has actually happened to people, I would recommend Lists First, which has 10 organ recipients who took on the traits of their donors. As we can see by Rachel's experience, these memories are as real as the memories that Roy talks about in one of the most breathtaking speeches ever in a film, just before he dies, when he says, "I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I watched sea beams glitter in the dark near Tannhauser Gate. All those moments will be lost in time, like tears in rain, time to die." Interestingly, no one has said this, but this is another moment that actually could make you think that Deckard isn't a replicant, as Roy doesn't see him as being one by saying, "you people." But maybe someone has actually made this comment and I've missed it. The way Roy relays his memories from his time off planet show that when it comes to memories implanted, there's no distinction. The memories, it seems, were used to help replicants believe in their own existence, but the memories do their job so well that they use them as justification to question their existence, and through questioning their own existence, they're questioning their place not only in the world but amongst humanity. If their memories are as real as humans and experience are of things that humans do, where is the difference? The only difference being in that in the first Blade Runner, the prologue, it starts off saying that the Nexus 6 replicants were superior in strength and agility and at least equal in intelligence to the genetic engineers who created them. Replicants were used off-world as slave labour in hazardous exploration and the colonisation of other planets. The mutiny was caused by a Nexus 6 combat team, so the question becomes, as a combat team, were they implanted with the real memories of soldiers or people who fought for their freedom, and then did they take on these memories as their own? And because they did so, it made them see the truth as to how they are used by humanity. So let's go back to the Blade Runner 2049 storyline, where Kay finds the date on the horse and he finds it on the tree, and he's researching it. We find out that a boy and girl were born on the same day. Now, had it panned out differently, I would have seen this as being Genesis, a new Adam and Eve. Now, with Adam and Eve, let's hypothetically say, for the sake of this video, let's just assume that they're real. It moved humanity forward because it ended the kind of experience that humanity from that point on experienced. It sounds like I'm taking the Bible quite literally, but only for this video. I'd say in-depth discussions about whether the Bible is real or not, a whole nother video. But then again, is it, considering that the focus in Blade Runner is on what's real? But anyway, we're going to move on from that. So I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent here, but it does tie into what I'm going to say as well. We find out later that Rachel had a daughter, that the son was a red herring. Now, I think the daughter could have also been used as a red herring too, like in The Matrix when the Oracle tells Neo that he's not the one so that he could realise it for himself. Now, that could have been one possibility, but only if at the end, Deckard didn't meet his daughter. The line of replicants that Kay was made with were all programmed with the same memories, and the reasons that the records show a boy and a girl was so that whoever came looking for the daughter was programmed to believe that the child is them. So in essence, they needed to relate to this in order for the film to have gone in the direction it's gone. And that's why Kay went along with it in the way he did, because he could relate to it, and he related to it because he saw the child as being him. In a way, it was kind of like the film Inception, and they have to believe that, because if they weren't to believe that, what's to stop them from killing Anna once they find her? So with believing they're the child, in a way they're protecting Anna and they're ensuring her survival, and also the survival of the replicants' resistance, as I call it. Anyway, I'm going to go back to a Bible reference now, in that I see Blade Runner as being Genesis 1, or the Old Testament, with Deckard and Rachel being Adam and Eve, and this film would be the New Testament. I can't remember which gospel it would be, whether it be Mark or Matthew. But there's a film called Dogma, and in that, Bethany is talking to a guy called Rufus, and he says to her, in the Bible, Jesus suddenly goes from 12 to 30. Where the text dealing with the missing 18 years? In Blade Runner 2049, only memory we have access to from Anna is her running and hiding her wooden horse in the furnace and getting beaten up by other kids. Not a pleasant memory, but I feel that was on purpose because it was to act as another catalyst in that it symbolises struggle and the struggle that the replicants go through, which is that they have to fight to hold on to anything that means anything to them. Though we're left with so many questions, Anna is a memory designer that is designing memories for current replicants because in her field, she is the best. Now, from my second viewing, it turns out she's a subcontractor because after the first viewing, I was thinking, if Mr. Wallace had met her, then the fact that she's so good at what she does means that she would be easier to find because it's like planting her in Mr. Wallace's operation and hoping for the best, even though she's been planted there because she's sabotaging Mr. Wallace's replicants by implanting her own memory into them. It seems that only the best Blade Runners discover the truth about replicants, because what makes them good is that they can see things that others would miss. And this is demonstrated in this film by Kay discovering that Rachel's a replicant when they look at her bones in the post-mortem. Going back to Anna, Kay visits Anna to discover more about whether the memory he has is real or not, and she tells him it is. Before doing so, she says that she plants pleasant memories in replicants because they've had such hard lives, so it's nice for them to have something cheerful to look back at. In other words, it leads them to be complacent, whereas with Anna's one memory, it's a negative one involving Anna running away from bullies because they want to take the one thing from her that is actually real, as it's carved from a real tree which was once alive but is now dead. What that memory is echoing is what Frasier says about sacrificing more than oneself is the closest thing that they can be to being human. However, the real thing that they want is the freedom that they see humanity experience. The same kind of thing when looking at slavery and what slaves wanted for themselves. After visiting Anna, Kay is given another baseline test that he fails as he's now non-compliant or losing his loyalty to humans, so he has 48 hours to either get back on track or leave. The baseline test where Kay is actually quoting words from Pay of Fire is the equivalent of this example. In The World's End, after running away from blanks, as they're called in that, Gary, Peter, Andy and Stephen are in the Bowls Club hiding. However, they are suspicious as to whether Gary is a blank or not. In order to prove that none of them are blanks, they show different marks and scars on their body, as well as telling stories as to how they were caused. In the end, Gary ends up headbutting a support beam that's holding up the roof a few times, which makes the others believe that it is him, as it's only something that Gary would do. As it's been identified that Pay of Fire is Kay's favourite book according to what they know about him, the fact that he doesn't quote it in the way that they want because his thought process is distracted by what he's learning would be the equivalent of him being a blank in The World's End, in that he's missing the story as to how a scar was caused. Before all this, I forgot to mention Mariette. After Kay visits the Wallace Corporation, we're introduced to Mariette. Now, I generally thought at first it was Love who had asked them to track him, but that turns out not to be the case in that it was actually Frasier. After Kay fails the baseline test, Mariette follows him home, and Joy makes it seem as if she told her to come here. Now, to deviate for a minute, a big question from the movie was whether Joy had genuine feelings for Kay, or whether she was just acting out her baseline, which is to love whoever quote-unquote owns her. Going back to this in this world, women it seems are programmed for one thing, and that being sexual pleasure, which is highlighted strongly with the fact that Joy is called Joy, again showing that women, whether they are AI or female replicants, are programmed for pleasure. Mariette as a replicant is what I call a replistu or a replical girl, not programmed for love or to feel love, her baseline being pleasure, and I see her as being a walking robotic version of a clitoris, programmed in a way to be desirable for men. Anyway, Mariette says that she is there so that Kay can experience sex with Joy in a real way. Even though the upgrade made her a fuller 3D hologram, she's still not as real as a replicant. Kay though feels hesitant because in his eyes, she is real, which would be a good way of looking at love, in that if we can feel it, then that's the only thing that we need to ensure that it is real. It's surprisingly similar to the scene in Her where Theodore and Samantha use a sex surrogate, but it doesn't work out as well as it does here. However, the difference is that the interaction was between a human and an AI, whereas the difference in Blade Runner 2049 is that the interaction is between replicant and AI. The variance being Theodore has never met Isabella, whereas Kay had met Mariette and had formed a connection, albeit very small and limited. The connection being that according to Joy, he was attracted to Mariette, whereas in Her, Theodore meets Isabella for the first time and after rejecting her says, "I couldn't get out of my head." However, as Kay is a replicant, it's easy for him to not be in his head as much. Kay in the beginning refuses, but Joy reassures him that it's okay, and I'm not sure whether it's because he has to comply because of the way he's been programmed, or he's giving in because he wants to make her happy. When Mariette leaves, she says to Joy, "I've been inside you and there's not as much as you think." Even though Kay hears it, he doesn't defend her, and the only reassurance he offers Joy is that he made her coffee again, showing that he does see her as being real, and that's all that matters. The way that Kay treats Joy is like a real woman, and this is what could have influenced her feelings. The advertisement for Joy is that they tell you what you want to hear and show you what you want to see. Kay did the same thing by seeing her more than a product, and in a way doing the same thing that she's programmed to do by telling her what she wants to hear, that she's real, and showing her what she wants to see, which is by the way he physically interacts, which would be in the same way as if she was a real woman. So after all that, Kay heads to Las Vegas to find Deckard. Before finding him, he comes across a swarm of bees and then later on a dog. Deckard delivers the line which says, "I don't know, you'll have to ask him," when Kay inquires whether the dog is a replicant or real. This echoes the owl in the first film, and even in Blade Runner Blackout 2022, when Trixie asks if the fish are real and her boyfriend says no. These films are all focused on the question of what is real and what does real actually feel like, with it being seen as the only thing that can be felt by humans because they have a soul, even though the soul itself is not real, in that we can't see a soul. We see the soul in the physical form, which is humanity, something that just is. Again, showing that there is not much difference between replicants and humans. Real seems to be an illusion that eludes replicants and something that they want to experience but don't feel like they can. It's like they have this barrier to what is actually real and they can't get past it because they are programmed not to. Now, this could be because of how the Blade Runner world has been designed, and real is only allowed to be experienced by humans because in replicants' eyes, they are the only thing that can be considered real in that world. Deckard after fighting Kay, and I know a lot of you are going to hate this because again I'm going to reference the Matrix movies and in particular the Matrix Reloaded again, and you're probably thinking no, because the Blade Runner films are much more superior to the Matrix films. But after some tense conversation, Deckard and Kay's proper interaction is Kay and Deckard fighting. Well, Deckard fighting Kay. As Seraph says in The Matrix Reloaded, you do not know someone until you fight them. In the fight, Kay is less resistant than Deckard, choosing not to fight as much. I think had he had done so, it may have revealed a bit more about the answers to whether Deckard is a replicant or not. And I feel it was also to show Deckard that he isn't there to kill or threaten him, but to just find out some more information. And I think that's why he was more passive in that fight. This time around, Deckard has more respect for replicants, because when Kay tells him his name, Deckard says that's not a name, that's a serial number. So seeing the fact that he is a replicant as being irrelevant, what it's trying to say is that it doesn't matter whether someone's a replicant or not. And this is demonstrated by Deckard in his interaction with Kay. I feel that this is the same thing in the relationship between Kay and Joy, in that it doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is the love that they share. And it's the same thing with Deckard, not with Kay, although I can see why that would be the case. More, I would say, Deckard's love for Rachel, in that the only thing that mattered was the love. Love catches up with them, and instead of taking Kay, she takes Deckard instead, which was a nice twist. Before leaving, Love ends up killing Joy, which for me was a sad moment because I really bought into the Kay and Joy relationship. It was as real to me as it was to Kay, and I think for that moment I understood why women love Ryan Gosling, as that was the equivalent of when Arnold says to John Connor, and yes, I'm going there with a TT reference, but when he says, "I now know why you cry, but it's something I could never do." I was genuinely thinking, "Aw," when I watched that. He was just so sensitive. He plays Kay in such a sensitive way and could have taught the humans in this so much more about what humanity exactly is, because he shows them exactly how it should be. Another scene where I saw Joy being in love with Kay was where she tells Kay to erase her from the console, and I felt that that scene was echoing what Frasier tells Kay later about sacrificing yourself for a good cause makes you the most human. Joy's purpose, it seems, is to go out of her way to prove her pre-programmed program is wrong with regards to saying what you want to hear and showing you what you want to see. She's doing the complete opposite, in that she tells him constantly what I feel he needs to hear and shows him what he needs to see. After they leave, Kay is rescued by the replicant resistance and told that Deckard and Rachel had a daughter, which leaves Kay broken because it's the equivalent of taking away his purpose, as well as making him think that he's not special, and kind of leaves you with a feeling of, I went through all this transformation, this massive change for, at that moment in time, seems like nothing. However, he's given a new mission to kill Deckard in order to stop them from finding Anna. He agrees, and Kay finds Deckard as he's being transported off-world. Deckard is being transported off-world because Mr. Wallace knows that there is nothing left for Deckard on Earth that he can use as leverage in order to get him to talk. There's been comments about how this was just a convenient plot point, yet the places of world that they've conquered may have different technology and different climates. Even though the focus is on torture, Mr. Wallace starts off by making Deckard question his feelings for Rachel, and Deckard doesn't buy into that. It was interesting though, because with the lighting, it seems that when Mr. Wallace was saying about Deckard's love for Rachel being programmed, and it was programmed on purpose, the light goes dark, brightens up when Deckard denies it. Anyway, Deckard is given another copy of Rachel, who is brutally murdered by love after Deckard rejects her for having the wrong colour eyes. I feel like when Deckard says about Rachel's eyes being the wrong colour, it was a dig to say that no matter what you do or how you create her, you will never create the unique version that she was. When looking at Deckard, he seems generally moved by the murder of this version of Rachel, in that how can you discard a replicant so easily, which is so radically different to when he retired Sora in the first one. It just felt there was more connection to this Rachel replicant, version 2 as I call her, than Sora, which is understandable and shows the growth of Deckard's character. Going back to torture, one of the ways I imagine is that there may be a world that might be able to create a simulated version of reality, and this reality is so real that it could drive Deckard crazy. Crazy in that it could involve seeing Rachel being retired or being retired at the hands of Deckard, feeling so real that he actually believes it happens, or a way of implanting memories that torment him. As the off-worlds have yet to be explored, we have no way of knowing exactly what kind of technology they have. Anyway, go back to Kay before he finds Deckard. He comes across a large version of Joy, which I feel is a visual representation of sacrificing oneself for something bigger, hence the size of this version of Joy. I do feel that the bigger version of Joy seems to be a deus ex machina in order to lead to the next bit. Now that scene, the flying to the off-world and the fight between Love and Kay, absolutely hated it and still hate it. And I hate it because it's a scene that's just been so overused in other movies. For some reason, it made me think back to Superman, and I mean the Christopher Reeve's version of Superman. It's just that that fight had so many elements we've seen in so many other movies. The victim in trouble, but the hero can't do anything because they have to fight the villain. And it also makes me think of another film I watched recently, Siege 2, the helicopter fight between Bobby Sachs and a female baddie. And yeah, it's just come to mind because how that fight is choreographed in Blade Runner 2049 is sort of similar to how it's coordinated in Under Siege 2. And I might be using that because I have poor taste in film, in that I actually do love that movie. I think it's a really good film. So anyway, we're going to move on. I saw it commented on Reddit that when Love is with Kay in the archive vault, and she thinks asking questions is a good way to get to know someone better, she's doing so because she's actually coming on to him, or as I interpret it further, she's trying to be Rachel to his Deckard, and the kiss that she gives him after she stabs him towards the end could be a way of her showing that she did have feelings for him, but also being like Judas in that she's betraying him. So going back to why I hated this, there was also the part where I call it the fake coming back to life. And that scene alone is what stops me from believing that this film is perfect. Also the scene where he's with Mariette in the underground basement and the replicant resistance comes into focus after Fraser talks about them, that immediately made me think of The Matrix. More The Matrix Reloaded, when the citizens of Zion are offering Neo gifts. Probably why I'm referencing The Matrix so much because of that scene. Had it been confirmed that Kay was the special one, which is what Joy seems to be encouraging, hence why Prey felt more destroyed, because the revelation destroyed the belief, and it just added to when he saw his wife getting killed earlier. It just feels like they were both the two of the same. Anyway, had they confirmed it, it would have made it feel even more cliche than the fight scene. Now, those two things are the only things I didn't like about the film, because they turn a film that has so many beautiful ideas, and ideas where the audience can walk away and think about them, into nearly a it's been done sci-fi film. Unlike another film that tried to be like this, but said, well, this is actually what it is, so it's like, thanks, I guess there's no need for me to watch that. And with the other film, the not having a meaning would have made that one probably a lot more better. So the last bit ends with Kay taking Deckard to meet his daughter and Kay dying. Now I must be a replicant because people were saying that they were crying, but I didn't feel that strongly about it until the second time I saw it. And I think that's because I saw Kay dying more as a visual representation of Roy's speech, what he says in the first one. I think it may be because the scene before this spoiled it for me, as the film began to turn into a bit of a cliche rather than doing what it had done so well up to that point, which was to hold its own. Also to add, had it have started with the eye opening and Kay's eyes closing, it would have been very reminiscent of the TV show Lost. But one of my theories is that, well, I wouldn't say it's a theory, but had they have done this, it probably would have been a theory. Anyway, what they could have done is, at the beginning, they could have had it as Rachel's eye, and some people have actually commented that they believe that it was, or it was meant to symbolise that, but had it started off with Rachel's eye in the beginning, and they've gone down the cliche route of Kay being Rachel's son, they could have done it where they started with a close-up of her eye, and then they ended up with a close-up of his eye closing. And I think had they done that, and I watched that the first time, I'd probably been like, that would have just blown me away, I would have thought, to be honest, and I would have thought that would have been such a nice touch to end it on. Also, when Kay is dying, there is no tear from his eye, Whenever Love killed or saw death, she cried. And I think at that moment it's because Kay feels the most human he's ever felt. I think to replicants, it seems like death is the thing that connects them to humans, in that it's the one thing they share in common. Even Gaff says so in the first Blade Runner when he says, it's a shame she won't live, but then again, who does? However, in this case, what makes Kay more human is when Fraser says about sacrificing oneself for something greater than oneself is the most human thing they can do. Also, the feeling of the snow is meant to be like tears in the rain. As Kay can't cry because he feels the most human he has, it symbolises the fleetingness of life in that it's here 1 second and gone the next with the snow melting. It could also symbolise Kay's metamorphosis from replicant to human. So in putting this video together, it really changed how I viewed this movie because it made me think about it more than I had been and changed my overall view of it. Also, I think I did look at certain parts of this a bit too deeply, and I didn't intend to do so, it's just the way it happened. This film is undeniably not only an Oscar winner, but a masterpiece. A film that is more a genuine work of art than an actual film. And you have to wonder, is Ryan Gosling going to be in an Oscar-nominated film like every single year? Because that just seems to be a pattern that keeps occurring. The cinematography was like nothing I've ever seen or experienced in the cinema. At times it felt like being on a plane and looking out at the landscape below. It reminded me of when I was on a plane like a couple of years ago and was watching Inside Out, the Disney film Inside Out, and hearing Bundle of Joy, and it was just so relaxing. The feeling I felt as I was flying was like I was gliding through clouds, and it felt exactly the same when I was watching this. For me, it feels like it's taken 7 years to get this kind of quality of film, or I would say even longer, especially as this has taken sequels to a whole nother level. And my question is, how have they managed to do this in that most sequels never surpass the original? Especially nowadays, it's such a rare feat, and I would say damn near impossible to do. But this is a sequel to Blade Runner, a film that everyone said that there could never be a sequel to because no one would believe it would be as good as the first Blade Runner. A film where, when this was announced, and I include myself in this, we were just like, why? We really didn't need a sequel. It's too unique to have a sequel. It will never work. And yet it does work, and it works so, so well. The fact that they can make a sequel to a film that is considered one of the best films ever made, and when you look at what they did, considering it was a film in the 80s, it's just the look of it was so timeless. So you've also got a film that's not only one of the greatest films of all time, it's timeless, and it's timeless because of the way it's presented. With this sequel, they've actually made it better. So you're just sat there thinking, how have you managed to do this? When you look at easy films, and I mean easy films that should have a sequel, and just how they miss the mark, and they do it so easily. Even on films that just be like, how have you managed to do this? How have you managed to mess up a sequel to the first film when it set up the sequel so easily, when you could just expand it upon the first ideas from the first film, and you got feedback as to how you can make that film better, which you could have put it into the second one, yet you still messed it up. I will never understand that. There has been a lot of bitching about the length of this film, and I didn't get it because The Wolf of Wall Street is like 3 hours long, whereas Blade Runner 2049 is 2 hours and 43 minutes. But no one seems to complain that much about the length of The Wolf of Wall Street. I don't know if it's because the focus is on the superficial, and that being said, quite a bit of that, and the debauchery and the money and the human things, etc. So it boggled my mind when people were complaining about the runtime of Blade Runner, considering The Wolf of Wall Street is longer. I would highly recommend that everyone go out there and watch this movie, just so that more movies like this can be made, because movies like this are such a rarity, and I didn't realise this until I went in there and I saw it. And I come out of the cinema and I realised my brain has been starving for this kind of film, so I really don't understand why it flopped. I also don't understand why it flopped though, because I've seen it twice so far, and both times that I've been in the cinema, they were packed. And I've been trying to book the BFI IMAX to see it there again, like the one with the massive, massive screen. And it's just constantly sold out. So I just don't get it. I really do not get why this film flopped. This is what we want, Hollywood. We want more films like this with original concepts. I mean, not the case where it's always robots. Sorry, I shouldn't say robots, I mean replicants, because they're not robots. So robots such as replicants wanting freedom, because then it's overused and it just comes like every other film. But just a story where we can question our own humanity and our own place, and look at a film to get a better understanding of ourselves and our behaviours and how we present those behaviours to everyone else. So with this film, we look at ourselves as we truly are and see the not so good, in that we fear anything that's different, so we oppress it, and through this oppression, We instead make this fear special, and it causes a rebellion and a new cycle of society, as we're currently in some ways seeing now, but we've seen before in the past with the civil rights movement and things like that. In the Blade Runner universe, we get it with replicants, in that replicants are treated in the same way that ethnic minorities were treated in the past. In Blade Runner 2049, replicants are called skin jobs because they lack a soul, showing that if you're different in any way, it's used against you. And it's a thing we keep perpetuating, and this perpetuation comes through the emergence of different races. First it was religion, then ethnicity, and then in the future it's either going to be AI or aliens. In the Blade Runner universe, humans treat replicants as non-humans, and in turn replicants treat AI as humans treat replicants, passing on a cycle of looking down on someone who is different. For instance, humans treat replicants different to them, such as calling them skin jobs because they lack a soul, well, in the eyes of humans in that world. It's taken so long for a film to be a masterpiece, and I haven't thought and wanted to explore every bit of writing, videos, books, etc., everything about a film since the first Matrix film. I do believe they're similar, and it might be because I'm biased, but I think they're similar. I'm just surprised there's not a video on how the Blade Runner universe is connected to the Matrix universe, and this is a prequel to the Matrix, because in the Matrix it's the humans who are fighting for their freedom, and in this one it's replicants. Now I know they're not robots, but it's just that the Matrix anime, and I can't remember the name of it, should have researched that, sorry, but that anime is similar to Blade Runner Blackout 2022, and I say it's similar because in the anime, the robots in that are fighting for their freedom, and you see how they're treated, and also in Blackout 2022, replicants are also fighting for their freedom, and you see that they're treated, and the treatment is just along the same lines. Now, a fun fact is that the guy who did the detective story and the kids story for the Animatrix actually did Blade Runner Blackout 2022. Actually, a couple of other YouTube videos that I have referenced, Decker was actually meant to be at the farm, and that was put in the original script, and what was going to happen was that he was going to rip the jaw of a replicant, and once he did that, it would reveal that there was a metal jaw underneath, indicating that the replicant was actually a robot. Another Easter egg that I learned is that the Blade Runner universe may be connected to the Alien universe. Now this is my theory, but I think the connection has to do with Mr. Wallace, in that he talks about conquering the stars. So this could mean that in the worlds that he has colonised, maybe he has come across the engineers and seen with his own eyes before he became blind their true capabilities, and now decides those capabilities for himself, which has maybe contributed to his golfplex, or he's yet to come across them. Maybe his program eyes, as I call them, and the plug socket behind his ear were made by either engineers or other off-world creators. Maybe he exchanged his eyes in order to solve the famine crisis on Earth and begin building his power. There's just so many questions, but I guess for now we're just going to have to wait and see. Also, one more thing I'm going to add is, as Harrison Ford is a carpenter in real life, do you think he actually carved that horse that they use in Blade Runner 2049? Thank you for watching. I hope I didn't bore you too much. Feel free to comment, like, subscribe or whatever, and I'll see you on the next one.